let's go ahead and get into the reason for why we're here and talk about the latest episode of Loki season 2, episode 4, just premiered on Disney Plus. It is entitled Heart of the TVA. The episode is directed by Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, who are coming back after directing the first episode. And now we are more than halfway through with this series. There are only 2 episodes left. I think coming off of last week, we both had some fair criticisms about the pacing and some of the
Mhm.
character development and just like the overall direction of where the story was heading. But now with episode 4 being somewhat of a critical episode, I think based off of last season and just kind of knowing the trend of how these things work, seemingly a critical episode that they had to sort of nail and get right in order to set up these final 2 episodes. And so before we dive into spoilers, before we get into the nitty gritty, I'll pass it over to you. Did this episode nail it for you? How are you feeling about episode 4 of Loki season 2?
I really like this episode. It there's a lot of good things in this episode that I did not see coming, to be honest. They definitely hit me over the head with a couple things that I just wasn't ready for, I guess, in watching, MCU TV show, even a show like Loki, man. There's a lot of surprises here. There's actually a lot of good acting here too, which was was also a slight breath of fresh air. It still looks good. I think the energy was still slightly weird to me. I think you say nail it. I would say like right under nail it. Like it was still a good episode, but there was still something small missing from the episode, and it could have been just a little bit in the pacing. But the thing is about it, this does again feel like another penultimate. How the first one felt. It just doesn't give the way the first one gave, if that makes sense. There's something about that first episode. I was like, oh shoot, we in this thing. This episode doesn't necessarily feel like that, but it does have remnants of it. It does have a little bit of DNA of that first episode that made this episode feel good. Um, and I think overall, by the end of it, I felt pretty satisfied. And part of that is this episode is Marvel taking swings. I mean, they are doing things here that make you question by the end of it. Wow, I want to watch the next episode now, and I can't do that. And I think that's a good sign when you say, "Damn, I wish the next episode was available for me to watch." To me, that's a good sign for a decent episode. And so, I'm pretty excited, man. This episode made me pretty excited. I think there's a lot of potential here for what they could do. What is scary for me is Marvel sometimes does this and they say, here's a really good thing here. Here's a really good thing. And then the next episode, they're like, okay, now let's rewind everything we did. It's not as big as you thought it was going to be. That's what I'm afraid of is they take a big swing, right? And let's say you're playing baseball, you're like, oh, that's going to be a home run. And then it hits the back wall. I don't want it to hit the back wall. I need a home run here. You know what I'm saying? I really need a home run. And so, um, right now, I feel really good about it. And it's one of those episodes where the episode after it can make or break it, I think. That's how it feels to me. It's like, oh, that was tight, but how's the next episode going to be? So, overall, I really enjoyed the episode. I think the energy's high. The acting was good. It still looks good. I think it's easy to say it's one of my favorite MCU looking things we've ever gotten. I'm just enjoying week to week. Like, damn, this looks really good to me. I'm really excited there. The score is killing it here too. I haven't talked about that a ton. I think the score is doing some really good things here, but I think overall they moved a lot of needles, and I'm really proud that they did that. And yeah, I like this episode, man. I do.
Yeah, I have to say, I think that this is probably my favorite episode of the season so far. I think that
Mhm.
this was a extremely enjoyable, very tense, almost hour of television in ways that I didn't anticipate. And I was certainly hoping, especially after last week, having some issues with some of the time that was devoted to certain characters and just the trajectory of where their stories were going. I was a little hesitant about where we would end up in this episode. And I gotta say, by the end of it, I was kind of knocked out by it because I do think that the pacing of it was handled significantly better, and that's largely due to the fact that I think, Aaron Moorhead and Justin Benson coming back and directing here. They also directed episode 1, which was previously my favorite episode so far. They're the perfect directors for these two just because of
Mhm.
the chaotic nature of what's been happening. You just, that ticking time bomb of this temporal loom situation that we've been dealing with, and all the tricks that they sort of employed in that first episode, they're back here, but also amplified to another more significant degree just because we have less time. Things are obviously a lot more dangerous by this particular point in the season. And so I thought that all of that was handled very, very well. I love the performances for the most part in this episode as well, because it was all dialogue heavy, character driven stuff that really advanced many of them forward and kind of closed some of the loops that were left lingering in previous episodes. And yeah, the way that it's shot and the way that it looks, this is hands down one of the best looking MCU projects. I love the handheld nature of things. I love just
Yes.
how unsteady and off kilter it feels, just to really match
Hmm.
that element of chaotic nature of just, all of the stuff that's unpredictable about what's happening, and just, again, that ticking time bomb that is just looming in the background. And we know that the heroes are kind of strapped for time in a show in and of itself about time. And so all of that stuff worked really, really well for me. And the cliffhanger was great. It was really shocking.
It's
and
good.
and
Hmm.
hopefully, I do agree. Hopefully that it is something that, can carry forth in like future stories in the remaining two episodes, but potentially even beyond that. I think that that's going to be important to see just how exactly that works within the larger story that they're telling. But overall, I was very satisfied by it. And again, I think it's my favorite of the season so far. But we have a lot to get to. So let's go ahead and get into it. This is your official spoiler warning. If you've not seen episode 4 of Loki season 2, go watch it on Disney Plus and come back and finish the rest of our conversation. And this week picks up essentially right where we left off last week's episode. We knew that Ravonna Renslayer was now at the Citadel at the end of time, along with Miss Minutes. Miss Minutes basically told her, like, I have a really big secret to tell you. And I had asked you last week, what the secret was going to be. Was it going to be something that we already knew in terms of her past being a principal at a school, or could it potentially be
Hmm.
something different? And thankfully, they did take a different route and they revealed something that we didn't necessarily know. We could have probably assumed it, but it became very clear in terms of Ravonna's past and her relationship to He Who Remains, because we find out through a sort of previous video recording that Miss Minutes is able to show Ravonna that she is responsible for ending the multiversal war, essentially helping establish the TVA, and she commanded the army that won the war. And
Hmm.
He Who Remains is taking this moment to thank her, to acknowledge her, and to basically, I think, give her a little bit of false hope and a false sense of pride in a way, to think that she could possibly rule alongside him, that they were going to, establish TVA together and be side by side, doing the business of all time. And we see that this is something that obviously hits her ego when she finds out that this was pretty much her destiny that was unfulfilled, because he makes the choice to wipe her memories. And we don't exactly know why, but I think we can safely assume it's just due to the nature of Kang and all of his variants. He is not allowing himself. He's not willing to cede over any power. He's not the one to bend the knee. Like, it's going to be him and him alone. And I
Yeah.
think that that's where we kind of see this come out. And so we see how that obviously affects Ravonna on an emotional level. And Miss Minutes simultaneously is able to give her this information and kind of incite a newfound anger and revenge out of her in order to go take over the TVA once again, and not needing He Who Remains, not needing Victor Timely, and they can rule together essentially. So what did you think about these opening moments, the information that was revealed, and the fact that I think now Ravonna is kind of rising to the top, at least for right now, is like the primary villain of this series, because
Yeah.
Victor Timely has been the only variant thus far, but Ravonna is certainly taking, I think, the mantle of being kind of the big bad so far of Loki season 2.
Oh man, it was painfully obvious and something we'll talk about later. But yeah, man, she definitely is slowly taking over. And it's so interesting to see because comic book wise, she does veer closer to the, I guess, the hero side of things, even though she has a thing with Kang. And so here it's just so interesting. They're like full send. Her and Miss Minutes are like villain counterparts now, low key right now, and it's really cool to watch though, because this is something we don't get to see too often. Is, I guess, the morph, right? The change into whatever Ravonna was, right? Again, for a while she's just like this leader of the TVA, and now we're literally watching her in real time kind of become this villain. Especially last week, both of us, we talked about like what is she trying to do? You know what I mean? What are her motivations? Where is she going? There's some answers we needed there in terms of what, yeah, what her character arc was going to be. And they literally opened the episode of like, here's her character arc. This is what she was, and this is where she's trying to go. I was like, thank God, what a breath of fresh air that they're actually giving us some meat and potatoes when it comes to her character. I'm really just glad to see I guess the way in which she stepped up for a while after watching it. in the beginning. I was like, man, this might take a little bit though. Nope. They kind of jump right into it. Ravona and Miss Minutes get right down to business. And I really like how malicious Miss Minutes is right now, even showing her this. Miss Minutes kind of has her own agenda, right? But she's like, okay, I need somebody with me. And she does have that little line in there that's like, maybe we don't need him at all. Kind of sort of thing. And so yeah, it's just really cool to see. I think these characters kind of evolve in front of our faces as we watch the TV show. So I'm glad they finally decided to give her something to do, not only something to do, but something important to do. After making me kind of feel like they were sidelining her, they're like, nope, she quickly rose to the top. So I love that.
Yeah, it was critical to get down to this business as early as possible and to really reveal to us, well, why does she have a reason to feel angry or as if she's been robbed of an opportunity at all? Like, why would she ever feel that way? And this certainly points a direct line to that. And I think it's interesting because what we heard from Mobius a couple of episodes ago about knowing his past life and his previous experience was, what if it was good? That would be a lot more painful to know that I came from a good life and I was plucked from that in order to have a life of servitude for the TVA. And now Ravona is kind of like the living embodiment of that because though she doesn't necessarily have awareness of her life as a principal, which is certainly mundane compared to the stuff she's doing now,
Hmm.
to see that He Who Remains has wiped their minds multiple times, who knows, like maybe countless times, he's done this freely. The fact that he's wiped it since she won the multiversal war, once again,
Hmm.
also just kind of demotes her and almost demoralizes her because she previously had the highest rank you could have alongside He Who Remains, really being his right hand person, his second in command,
Hmm.
running the entire sacred timeline. I mean, it couldn't really get any better than that. And she was obviously proud of her accomplishment and she was willing to do the work. And she has that revelation after Miss Minutes shows her the recording. Like, he sat here in this palace while I did his work. Like, what the fuck? I'm sure a lot of women feel that way about their relationships with men. Like,
For
I'm
sure.
out here busting my ass while you get to sit here and play video games and just chill. And so I think that that's just like really an interesting route to take her and her be the living embodiment of that while Mobius sort of warned us about that potential reality for his own life. We kind of see it
Hmm.
coming to life and manifest in a specific type of way for Ravona here. And so it's really interesting and I think it's fascinating. It's also really fascinating too that she is, I think, kind of a self-serving individual because we hear her say a lot throughout the previous episode and this episode, like, look how quickly the TVA fell apart when I left. Like, look at how things just went
Mm.
to shit after I was away. It's
Hmm.
also like,
Hmm.
well, she kind of wants that sense of pride, that sense of ownership, and that sense of power. And she kind of
Yeah.
revels in the fact to know that the TVA isn't what it used to be when she was in charge. And so
Hmm.
while I think we can point fingers at He Who Remains and we can say, like, you're doing some really kind of treacherous stuff at taking away people's memories, but also simultaneously on her end, she's still not necessarily, I think, somebody to look up to because she clearly, I think, is really reveling in the idea of power and ownership and control. That's what she's all about, at least so far,
Yeah.
especially after how she reacted to this recording. We should talk about also Victor Timely, who comes into the TVA now. He has come from his time in 1893 in Chicago, and he's here at the TVA because he essentially has to help the rest of the crew with this temporal loom. He's the only one with his aura that can prevent the temporal loom from exploding, and they are on the verge of an absolute catastrophe. And we get to see, Victor Timely sort of walk around the TVA headquarters, kind of soak it all in, and just see just this magnificent creation, which is obviously for him just like a wondrous thing because he's coming from over 100 years in the past and he's seeing just this technologically advanced headquarters that is controlling all of time, and he gets to meet everybody. He gets to meet Casey and OB, and they have a really I think cute exchange with each other to find out that
Hmm.
they have basically been feeding each other the same information. They are both responsible for the creation of the TVA handbook. OB is inspired by Victor Timely. Victor Timely is inspired by OB. Literally an Ouroboros come to life like between their
Literally an
relationship.
Ouroboros. Yep.
So it was like really all, I think cool stuff. And I gotta say, I think Jonathan Majors, in terms of his acting here, he really showed me even more than I expected. Like
Yes.
the chops came
Yes.
out in a really, really fascinating way. And to see him play off of everybody I think it was just like a really fun dynamic. What did you think about
Mhm.
just all that time spent? There's obviously the sci-fi babble that we get to, like why they're
Mhm.
there, but just the whole experience of him being in the TVA and kind of seeing presumably what his creation would ultimately be, because he's kind of responsible for it knowing that he got the handbook, and so he can kind of see it come to life. What did you think about all that?
Yeah, I love it, man. I love how just how curious he is about everything because he's like I did this. I helped make this and put this thing together almost kind of by myself. I love how he seems so genuinely curious and interested in everything happening around him versus all the other gang variants have always already been in those, parts of, I guess, nerdom, right? They've already, he who remains has already lived that life. The Kang in Quantumania already has the loom that we're trying to build. You know what I'm saying? Like it's so crazy that this Kang is, like, again, the most fresh of them all. And I guess, to put it quite frankly, he's the youngest of them all that we've seen so far. He has not lived all of these lives that some of the other kings have lived, man. But it's really cool to see him nerd out, him in Ouroboros OB kind of go back and forth, man. Like, hey, bro, can I have your autograph? Yes. Can you have my autograph? Like, please sign my book. I really love that part of it, again, because it feels genuine, because we've learned them to be scholars. And then, like, of course, if you followed these things, you'd like, oh shoot, I'm kind of freaking out right now. So I love that. But in these moments, we also get the that feeling of a race for time. They're like, look, y'all, what are y'all doing? Like, sure, we'll do all that stuff later. Let's fix these timelines first and then get back to it. So yeah, I just love the innocent nature of it all. It all felt really good. But I also love how excited he was to get some hot chocolate. So I was like, he was like, that came out of a machine. Yes, can I see that machine that makes hot chocolate? I think that's so funny. It made me happy though too, because it's hot chocolate season now in real life. So I was like, heck yeah, I'm excited to go get me some hot chocolate now. Is this a machine I've been taking granted for granted the entire time? Now I feel like I need to go appreciate hot chocolate machines even more than I did before. But it was really cool to see. Again, them nerd out in these moments, man, of him just being very curious about everything happening around him, because even though he made it, quote unquote, not that version of him, he was excited to see the science. And I think that was true to his character as a scientist from the 1800s at that.
Yeah, in somewhat surprising fashion, what I could not have predicted coming into this season of Loki, especially after seeing Victor Timely for the first time in Quantumania, was that he's not a villain. Like, he's really not. We we
Mhm.
we speculated a lot about that last week. Like, yeah, he has some shady tendencies. He might be a con man, but also he is still a brilliant person. Like, he is still smart. He just
Mhm.
doesn't have the resources and the technology. And Obi even, sort of says that when they talk to each other. He's like, you could have been Einstein if you had the resources that Einstein had. You would have been even more brilliant than he was. It's just like a matter of timing. And so now, like, this episode kind of cements the fact that Victor Timely is not a bad guy. Maybe a little bit misguided, maybe a little bit of a loner, obviously kind of awkward, but he's not a terrible, sort of natured person at all. And I think that just goes to show just the variety of Kang variants that we are seeing at this point. Now that could change. Anything could happen,
Mhm.
and maybe there is something a little bit more sinister underneath. That would be a huge swerve, but I think so far I like that welcome just difference, because you have all these bad people around him. You had,
Mhm.
people like Ravona and Miss Minutes and Brad who were making just like pretty terrible decisions unilaterally. And he's just like, wow, like, what's going on here? He doesn't even know how to react to people. He looks at Miss
Yeah.
Minute and he's like, oh dear. Like, it's just such funny stuff. He also,
Mhm.
when he first arrived at the TVA, he said something I've literally never heard of before. Like, obviously Loki and Mobius, they're trying to get him to come help fix the temporal loom. They're trying to get him to trust them after they've chased him across time. And he's like, I'm from Chicago, the shadocracy capital of the
The
world.
shadocracy.
What the fuck is that? I have literally never heard something like that. The
Yeah.
shadocracy capital of the world. I'm like, is he talking about like just people are shady and just like
Shady.
underhanded? I was just like, that is crazy, like a crazy invention that he just threw out in this episode. But it was quite hilarious. Like, when I went back and
Mhm.
watched it, I was like, yo, I might have to use that. That's just
You
different.
have
But
to.
it was
Mhm.
it was it was all really cool stuff to see. And again, I think Jonathan Major's performance really stood out here. He
Mhm.
has really, really good chemistry with most people in this cast. I think he plays exceptionally well off of everybody, especially OB. To see him and Kiki Kwan just have those moments was really,
Mhm.
really cool. Also, I think one of the things that I have been vocal about that I do think that has somewhat held this show back, and still to a degree kind of continues to hold it back, is the sci-fi nature
Mhm.
of the central sort of narrative conflict of this, and that's this temporal loom situation, which has snapped into focus as being the primary narrative device that is driving the story forward. I will say here that in this episode, though they had the sci-fi techno babble, still all of the weird, sort of language and all the weird jargon, it did feel a little bit easier to digest it in this episode compared to previous episodes. Like, it actually felt like they took a little bit more of a moment to just have that opportunity to have Casey and OB and He Who Remains,
Hmm.
really in the room, just kind of talking about it. But what really helped it for me was OB building a model to just show what needs to happen. And I thought explicitly it was obviously a reference to Back to the Future. He built a full scale model, and he had a
Yep.
sign on it that said not to scale. Literally, Doc Brown said that in Back to the Future. And he's like, "Oh, I don't even have like an extra coat of paint on it," but they just like walk through what needs to happen. And I was like, "Oh, this kind of makes sense." It isn't all the way there. It's still kind of, I think one of those situations where it's like, all right, that's still kind of confusing. I don't know exactly like what this throughput multiplier is supposed to do. And now you're talking about the loom decaying. Like, that stuff can still kind of be a thing, but ultimately we find out like they need to try to contain the timelines. Essentially, the
Exactly.
timelines are about to explode out of the loom. That's really
Yep.
what it boils down to when you get to
Yep.
the brass tacks of it. What did you think about just them taking the time once again, I think, to walk the audience through just those moments of what needs to happen in order for this, sort of catastrophic event to not occur?
Yeah, I think they're just trying to guide us to like, hey, look, if this is the severity of the timelines in the TVA, and this is what we got to do. And what I do like about the demonstration is the similarity to what we see in the first episode, right? Like, oh, somebody has to go out here. He takes a little army suit, walks down the line. It's like, oh, we've seen this part before. You don't have to understand that part. You just have to understand the second part, which is like, look, point this thing that'll make the looms bigger or whatever, that'll make everything bigger so the timelines don't explode. Or, oh, okay. And so I think it's just good to have that context coming into again what happens later in the episode, but it's good to have that context of what did and didn't happen, or what went wrong and what didn't go wrong, of what's going on, because it really, again, we've been talking about it at length. Like, dang, this is the thing that's not working as well here, but I think it really is a small explanation. Let's put it on the board. Show us what's happening here to get people to buy into. Oh, okay, this is the at least the idea of the science. And also we've been hearing it constantly too, right? Like throughput multiplier, throughput multiplier. Oh, it's literally multiplying how many rings or how many timelines we can have. Oh, of course. Let's send it to the new loom to make it so we can have more time. It's like, oh, we've heard it enough times now. It's like things are starting to make sense. So I like that they finally boggled down, like you said, kind of put all the nerdy guys in the room about this. Put your Casey, put your OB, and put your Victor Timely in the room and said, look, this is how it works. And so yeah, I'm pretty glad they did it too.
Yeah, pretty effective scene for sure. The next moment we'll address is, I think, a really pivotal scene, primarily between Sylvie and Loki, but it actually starts with Sylvie and Mobius. And essentially, Sylvie lashes out at Mobius because he's showing, I think, an apparent lack of urgency at the issue at hand. She's obviously like, "Yo, we have business to tend to. Like, let's do this." Even in the room in OB's, sort of room in his headquarters, she's like, "Guys, it's nice that you all love each other and that you admire each other, but like, we got
Mm-hmm.
stuff to do." And so she just goes the fuck off on Mobius, like, I this might be your life. This might just be another harrowing situation that you deal with on a day-to-day basis as a guy who works for the TVA, but literally millions of lives, billions of lives are at stake, and we don't have time for this bullshit because you want to get pie. She goes off, and then Loki
Mm-hmm.
and Sylvie have their own conversation just about what this is all for and what's going to happen. And I know last week we talked a lot about Sylvie starting to somewhat fade into the background and becoming less of a focal point this season, just due to the fact that there are more characters that we have to spend time with. But that was a little bit of an unfortunate thing because she was so pivotal for
Yeah.
season one and really setting in motion all of these events. I mean, she's largely responsible. And so I thought that this moment was really, really key for her to, and Loki to talk and Loki to give an example about having to, sort of change perspective when he brought up the example of Thor from the first
Mm-hmm.
movie and how Thor went to Earth and became a new person. And
Yeah.
she has just kind of hardened herself, so much because she believes if you act soft, if you have a soft heart, that's how lives are lost. That's how stuff actually gets fucked up if you don't actually just make decisions. But she also couldn't kill Victor timely, which is showing some growth for her as well, because she just saw the fear in his eyes, which was completely different than what she
Mhm.
saw in the eyes of He Who Remains. And so, what were your thoughts just about the conversation and them just, sort of boiling down this whole conflict and their role in it specifically? Because it ends with those really, really, I think, just key words from Loki essentially saying, like, we are gods. And so, gods have to essentially do what gods need to do in order to fix things. So, what did you think about just their interaction and how Sylvie, sort of came back to the forefront of this episode?
Yeah, it's funny. We even talked about the baller stuff at the a little bit of last episode where I was like, I feel like this God stuff is gonna come back around. We're gonna
Yeah,
be talking about this God stuff. And I love that it does in fact come back around here, but it just does give us time finally again for Sylvie and Loki to talk again. Again, it's still not the lovey-dovey stuff I thought it was going to be, but it's still about business, man. And I love the point that Loki is making. This dude has matured first and foremost. I don't know who this is.
man.
This is, to be honest, it's a little bittersweet. Like I kind of miss, like, are we ever gonna get crazy mischievous Loki back? I don't know. I don't know what it looks like. We got him a little bit in that first episode when he was chasing Brad, but I don't know we'll get him back because this dude feels like a hero to me. He's dropping gems, man. But to come from his own experience, saying how Thor went to Earth and got a little soft. He's like, Sylvie, I don't know if you noticed, but you just low key did the same thing. You went to Earth and you didn't kill Victor timely. Because if you did, everything is going to shit. And you really took the time out not to make that decision for X reason, X reason, X reason. Sylvie is like, all of this for hope. And I understand Sylvie's point though too. Sylvie is like, we are shooting for the stars. We cannot see any of this. We don't know what's going to happen. I really like that idea because it's Loki is like, we don't have a choice on one hand, and Sylvie is like, okay, but is the choice to jump into, you know what I'm saying? To jump into nothingness, jump into the void. And so I understand both of their points of views, but the idea that we are them being gods is huge to me because she's like, I feels like a little bit like playing God. And I think even as we watch the show, I've kind of been talking about this too, though. It was like, damn, Loki's he's a whole god, man. He has these powers, which I love in this episode. They get rid of everything. They're like, yes, turn it off so we can use our powers. But there's something here where they do get to use their, I guess, their godliness to potentially save all of these worlds, right? To save all of these timelines. And I'm happy they talk about that because Loki and Sylvie aren't like everybody else. They may have had lives on the timeline, but they lived in different, you know what I'm saying? They're different. They would have been welcome in Olympia that we've seen in Thor in what's that movie? Thor 4. They would have been in that place with all the other gods. And so it's just really interesting that they finally are like talking about this. Like, yes, we are kind of different than everybody else. Like we are legit gods. So yeah, it's just cool to see that they actually had that conversation.
Yeah, what it really comes down to, Sylvie has just been about burn it down this entire time. She's like, just burn this shit down. We need to just start from scratch. There could be
Mm-hmm.
something, there could be a TVA, I guess, but the TVA as it exists is a unfixable system. And Loki is obviously of the opposite mind. He's like, well, no, we can change it. We have the right people to change it, but it really kind of starts with us. And there are certain people that we need to rely on to get past
Mm,
the stuff that we're dealing with. And I think both are valid, especially from
exactly.
their vantage points. The only thing with Sylvie is that she does not have any better solutions to this whole thing. And I think that was Loki's
Mm-hmm.
point. Like, this is our best solution right now. Like, what do you got? Like, tell me what you can do and what other path we can
Mm-hmm.
take in order to fix all of this, because burn it down isn't really an option right now because this shit's about to blow up anyway. So like we're gonna be left with nothing on top of nothing. And so we can
Yeah.
instead try to save all of these lives, all of these timelines, and then fix it from within and see what comes from that. And yeah, hope is, one of those thankless things that you can't measure. But so far, Loki
Mhm.
has made, I think, some decent assessments about people and who he should place his faith into. He hasn't really shown any sort of bad judgment in the terms of characteristics and character traits of other people. I think he's been pretty spot on at this point because he is he has been the opposite of that, and he has grown so much. He's able to spot a liar from a mile away because he's done it so much. And so I
That's
think it's
true.
it's really useful of him to be that assessment of people's character, to see like, well, they can probably really help with this fight, and this is who we can trust, and so we need them on our side. But it's a really interesting dynamic. I'm glad that they got down to this too, because it was getting a bit redundant for Sylvie to just kind of be in the background, showing up, trying to kill people, and now it's a little bit
Mhm.
more of, okay, this is really where I'm coming from, and this is really why I don't think it's going to work. And now she's just kind of making the choice to say, all right, I'm going to go with the plan. I'm going to, side with you, and we're going to figure this out and see what happens. So it was a really interesting dynamic for sure. But on the other side of things, we also caught up with Brad Wolf and General Dox, who are imprisoned due to their nefarious crimes from a couple of episodes ago. They were
Mhm.
pruning timelines. Essentially, obviously, Brad was living his own life. He had abandoned his post as a hunter. General Dox had enacted this plan that was hugely, hugely, I think, an event of mass genocide, really, if you think about it and boil it down. And so they kind of revisit those events, and you see them in prison, but also Miss Minutes and Ravona have now infiltrated the TVA. They have made it back inside, and so we see them try to get General Dox and all of these imprisoned hunters on their side to essentially kind of create an act of mutiny against the TVA and overthrow it and take over power, and really, really take charge and control of everything that's happening right now. General Dox and pretty much everybody else in the room, they're not really for it. They're kind of on a different side of the playing field at this point, especially because of Hunter B-15 having conversations with them and kind of having those talks about just where things are. But we see Brad is still, I think, in an eternal state of conflict, and ultimately is on the side of, I built a life for myself. I want to live that life. I don't want to live
Mhm.
this life in the TVA. I'm a movie star. I make movies. I'm famous. I got a lot of money. I should have the opportunity to choose. And that's what I want to go do. And so he stands by idly as we see Miss Minutes and Ravona brutally kill everybody, all of the imprisoned people, including General Dox. And one of the most crazy visuals is seeing Miss Minutes just revel in the annihilation of these people and just
Oh
have
boy.
all the fun and the joy in her
Mhm.
face. I think just revealing that true villainous nature behind her character. So this is probably the most it's probably the most gruesome scene of the series so far. We don't see them actually die, but the implication and the sounds and Brad Wolf's
Mhm.
face, they all tell the story, I think, more powerfully than a visual ever could. So what did you think about just the two sort of opposing sides, the two different viewpoints, and also the act itself, this act of mass murder against all of these different hunters?
Man, oh man, there's so much here. Starting with Docs, man. I she really cares about the TVA if she's willing to die almost immediately after B-15 brings her, kind of this idea of what a partnership could look like. And then Ravona walks in, says what she has to say, and she's like, "Damn, I'd rather die." And she, you know what I mean? And it's like, damn, she really did care about the TVA. Her energy was just misplaced. What I will say, again, this is very dark. What I will say about this is she definitely just purged hella timelines and killed hella people, and
Very
she
true.
absolutely just paid for it. So that's what I was saying. It sold it to people that was in there. Definitely just paid for it. But the way they died here, man, is so crazy. And I think what makes this so much more effective is when we do see Loki put Brad in the box at the first time. Part of me also feels like beyond all this, Brad is not going back in that goddamn box. Part of me is like, he's just like, no, let me find a way to also not be in this box. Yes, I'm a movie star. I just don't want to die like that either. And so it it was so crazy to see because it was also like B-15's emotion when she walks in, right? And it's just like
Yeah, her reaction was
her
just
reaction is just
visceral.
like, and we've seen how small the box can get. Again, I'm surprised Brad didn't break any bones. Like I feel like the dude shouldn't be able to move something right now. Like the box gets really small, and so what I am curious is off screen, like if when it gets completely is there blood? Like, do they just disappear? Like, is there? What does this thing look like? Part of me wanted to see. I knew they wouldn't go there. Part of me was like, please turn the camera. Is it just empty? Like, what? What does this thing look like by the end of it all? I want to know. Um, but man, what a interesting, I think, moment, I think, of morality in the show, right? Where Ravona we knew what she was capable of after hearing that she was a commander, right? After hearing she helped win the multiversal war. I'm sure they killed countless people, countless timelines in that moment as well. But here, already, like you just found out 10 minutes ago that you was commander of this army, and you're already axing a room full of, I guess, quote unquote, war criminals. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's really crazy how fast their turnaround is. But can you blame Brad for the decision he made? It's like die or maybe figure out something to go live your life on the timeline eventually. I don't know if you can really blame him too much. And I think that's what makes these choices so interesting. I think as much as you can betray the general docs, I feel like you can say yes right now and maybe try to betray Renslayer, you know what I'm saying, later on. And part of me wishes, at least as a facade, Docs was like, yeah, we'll go along with your plan, didn't die, and then subverted those expectations later on and kind of did something against Renslayer and Miss Minutes wishes. Last thing I'll say, man, Miss Minutes is crazy.
Fucking nutty. Wild the way she reacted in
She
that
is
scene.
insane. And I'm curious, in the inception of her programming, I'm curious if some of that maliciousness, some of that weirdness comes from Kang at all, right? Not necessarily the Victor Timely we know, right? Because he hadn't made Miss Minutes yet, and the Victor Timely we know, but the one that did make Miss Minutes. Is there a little bit of like that maliciousness coming from him? Is there a little bit of Kang the Conqueror in Miss Minutes, and that's why she finds pleasure and domination, right? Is that the conqueror part of her that's like, ooh, I'm excited about this bloodshed. I'm excited about people dying who are against our cause, because she's there. Miss Minutes' mind didn't get wiped. Miss Minutes has seen it all. And so I'm curious if a little bit of Kang is in there, and that's why she's so excited to see these people perish. But wow, what a moment in shoot the MCU, man. It's very few things I've seen that look that dark. I was like, even the snap was at least like they withered away. These people are getting smashed like to whatever, to oblivion. It was really dark. So it was definitely scary, but it was really cool to see at the same time. The MCU, I think, go to those lengths of darkness, because now it's like, oh, okay, let's continue to push those bounds of what we can do.
Yeah, and they linger on it. You know, you see Brad Wolf's face for a while. They just hold the camera there, and then as you noted, Hunter B-15 coming in, you see her reaction for a while. So they take the time to really, I think, just illustrate the monstrosity of what just happened, the sadistic nature behind what Miss Minutes and Ravonna just did here, and it's a lot of people in that holding room. It's not like three of them. It's like 15 of them probably who all
Yeah.
got squished up in that torture box. It's a really, really crazy thing to conceptualize and to think about. And I think the far more terrifying thing is it's that Steven Spielberg trick. Like, I'm not going to show you the shark. You're just going to
Mm-hmm.
believe in the power of the shark until I decide to show
Mm-hmm.
you. And that's what this moment does, where it's like, we're not going to show you the violence. Like, everything that's implied from the sounds and the reactions and just the horrific nature of it, especially Miss Minutes there, it all really illustrates just like what's going on here. And I just love that they took that risk and showed how dangerous Ravonna and Miss Minutes are together. And damn it, Sylvie has to be blamed for leaving her with this fucking pad. Like, why would you make that critical mistake to allow her to traverse and travel any point in time to any place that she can? Because now she's back in the TVA, wreaking all hell, causing nothing but anarchy. It's like you
Yeah.
don't give a person that type of power, knowing that she is essentially power hungry. And now you have Miss Minutes, who's just bullish on all this shit, completely revenge driven. She's willing to sacrifice anybody and anything. She wants a body. Who knows what the fuck she's going to do? And so now you
Mm-hmm.
have some really, really dangerous people here who are now just wreaking all this havoc on the TVA. And so I think it goes to show just, some of the consequences of those actions. But let's stay here though. Another, smaller scene that I do want to talk about is when Ravonna and Miss Minutes they essentially capture Victor Timely. They
Mm-hmm.
take him hostage, and they're in the war council room, and there's that one small moment where Miss Minutes is pretty much kind of, shutting down. They figured out a way, OB and Casey and everybody on
Mm-hmm.
that side of the crew, they figured out a way to shut down the TVA's power controls, because Miss Minutes she was overriding everything prior to that. She was overriding temp pads and all their technology. They basically shut down the entire system to reboot it so that she could be offline. And so as we see her starting to shut down and malfunction
Mm-hmm.
and glitch, she says a really, really dark line, a really scary line before she completely disappears. And she looks directly at Victor Timely and tells him, "You'll never be him." Essentially, I think referencing He Who Remains, saying that
Mm-hmm.
you could just never live up to him. And right after that, they do that slow pan and that reveal to show basically the statue of Kang the Conqueror, He Who Remains, across the TVA. So it was a great shot, a great way again to just once again sort of illustrate this anger that she has towards Victor Timely, which is really
Yeah.
manifested in a quick fashion once he turned her down. What did you think about just that moment and just the tension again that I think it added to the cause of what's happening here from Ravonna and Miss Minutes and their essentially the war that they've launched against the TVA?
Shout out to another moment of darkness in this episode, man. The way that Miss Minutes shut down, she could have just disappeared or something. No, they literally take out the time to slowly strip away every slight thing of programming AI that she has. That's a very specific choice that Marvel made to make her like look like she also perished until the very last snapshot. Even after the line she says, "If you'll never be him," is just she's a normal ass clock. It was like 12, 3, 6, and 9, and then she disappears. I was like, what is going on in this episode, man? Because that's the best way again to convey that Miss Minutes is at least being again stripped away of all her power, yes, but it's also like, damn, this is what it looked like if she died in slow motion. That's what it would look like. And so I shout out to them for taking the time to do that as well, man. But I thought this little moment was great. There's even a small acting moment from Jonathan Majors here where when Miss Minutes is starting to malfunction, she stutters and he's like, "There's no need to mock," or whatever he said. I was like, yes, yes, you would say something like that. I thought that was a really good line. In fact, I didn't talk about this, but I actually really love the script for this episode in particular. There was a lot of things being said and a lot of words and dialogue being said. I was like, yeah, I love a lot of this writing. They did a lot of really good dialogue in this episode, man. But what a crazy moment again. What a way to say you'll never be him and He Who Remains. But it also just reaffirmed a lot of the things we thought too, that Victor Timely is so much of this different being. It's almost like that was kind of the point of some of this. It's like, look, y'all, Victor Timely again is not He Who Remains. They may have are trying to do this loop thing, right? This bootstrap time loop thing where it seems like this Victor Timely should end up like He Who Remains, but it's not him. And even Miss Minutes again is confirming that like you'll never be him. And so what I could only imagine what that means to Victor Timely though too. Like, did Victor Timely even really ever want to be him? You know what I mean? Like, what? Why is she is so mad at this guy? It's so interesting. A part of me even feels like you say how quick of a turnaround it is. Is she completely mad at Victor Timely, or does she still have some shit against He Who Remains? You know what I mean? Like, she's just so upset in these moments. But yeah, very interesting. I loved everything about this moment. I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, you don't want to have two exes coming at you at the same time. That's what this really boils down to. Two
Ooh.
exes who were very upset and mad, and Miss Minutes again, just again rising to the top along with Ravonna as being the primary villains of the show. It was a really haunting moment to just see her say those words, because for the first time ever, we saw her completely scowl and look angry. We've never really seen
Mm-hmm.
her look that way. She's obviously had joy. She's been very just friendly and this
Mm-hmm.
mascot, this unassuming cartoon clock that spouts off all the history. And now we actually see like, wow, this is a really terrifying figure because she hasn't had her mind wiped. She's obviously a technological, artificial, sort of being. So capable of essentially anything. And I think that, having those be the final words, at least for now, of Miss Minutes. I don't know. I think it could go another way potentially too, because Victor Timely, although he hasn't proven himself to be evil or a bad guy or any of that, I mean, who's to say that perhaps in what I think is going to be an inevitable return of Victor Timely, because I think that's where this all is going to go anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who's to
Yeah.
say that he doesn't have a change of heart? Who's to say that he doesn't see all of the stuff at the TVA and he's like, you know what? Maybe I do need to be in charge of this. Maybe I need to walk down a different path. Maybe this is like the
Mm-hmm.
calling that I need to move forward with. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
Ravonna and Miss Minutes have a point, and that could be some twisted psychology that Miss Minutes could be throwing at him. Maybe she's doing
Mm-hmm.
that on purpose. Like, you'll never be him. It's like, I'm saying this to try to get you to that level. It's like that weird dynamic of coaching somebody into something by basically knocking them down to build them back up, and I think that could also be potentially be a route there. So it's
Yeah.
all very, very intriguing, just like this whole dynamic of who you're meant to be and destiny and fate, or can you walk your own path, all that stuff. It's really coming to the forefront here. Shortly thereafter, after they have, sort of rebooted the entire system, all hell breaks loose once again. Loki and Sylvie are able to use their powers because once the systems are down, they can be their Asgardian selves again. So we see them play a really cool trick on Brad, in order to get Victor Timely back. And then there's a really key moment that calls back to episode one, which a lot of this, sort of final 10 minutes or so does. But there was a moment in episode one where we saw Loki in the midst of the TVA as he's time slipping. Everything is just, falling to shit. It's really chaotic. And he sees Sylvie on the elevator. And that was essentially the first time that we saw her in the season. And then he gets pruned out of nowhere, but we don't see who prunes him. But that brings us to this episode where we ultimately see that the person who pruned him was himself. Himself was in the
Hmm.
TVA at the same time, so he time slipped to this future time, and so he decided to see himself and make the choice to prune himself. Then revealing himself to Sylvie, who was in the elevator, and he's like, "It'll all make sense. Just trust me." And they don't actually tell us like why he did that and why he made the choice that he made. But I think based off of the events of the end of this episode, it probably points to the fact that he pruned himself out of that particular existence to still maintain some sort of existence to be able to come back to
Hmm.
solve what ultimately happens at the end of this episode. And that's the fact that the TVA, it appears to be no more. Everything just goes to shit. Victor Timely sacrifices himself unknowingly. He goes out to try to fix a temporal loom, turns into spaghetti, and just because of all the radiation evaporates out of time. Another, particularly gruesome scene. And it ends on this really, really shocking cliffhanger of just an explosion of mass
Hmm.
proportions. And so it's a lot there. But firstly, what do you think about the pruning and that choice to have this moment, come back around and we actually see that Loki is the one who made that choice? Like what could they potentially be pointing to with him pruning himself in addition to the events of what happened at the end of this episode and how they might set up the remaining two episodes?
It's so funny how the MCU continues to break its own time rules. I just think it's funny. I think at this point, the goal is not to care about all of these rules per se, but to just enjoy whatever just a good superhero comic booky story, man, at this point, because they are really but the bootstrap kind of theory thing that they've been doing is not how they explain time to us, which is really funny because now they have been doubling down of like the whole bootstrap theory. They did it more than once. They just did it with the book, and Victor Timely Ouroboros was one bootstrap, and here we are again with Loki pruning himself of like another loop that's happening here. And so at this point, I'm like, whatever y'all say, man, whatever y'all say. But I think they're trying to get us to buy into that bootstrap idea now, at least right now in Loki for a reason. And I think that will come back around in whatever these next two episodes give us, right? Not only that, but the pruning specifically in a moment like this could lead to what you were talking about with Victor Timely, of him eventually coming popping up again, right? If you remember in the first episode, Loki could only come back when the thing turned green, right? It almost feels like Victor Timely disappears and gets turns into spaghetti in the moment, similar to when the thing would have turned green, if that makes sense, in that he can be pulled out of time into some other moment of time. Again, very nerdy, weird stuff. But I think they're trying to get us to buy into the idea that a lot of people that get purged went somewhere, and then that can feed into something else. In fact, I think the guy that got purged that was in front of at the hot chocolate machine, I think he's somewhere. I don't
Yeah.
think we'll see the last of him. I think he exists somewhere, and we'll see him again. But I think that's kind of one of the points they're trying to drive home. There is the bootstrap theory, is the loop, is that this event caused something else, because they even did it in Miss Marvel. Miss Marvel literally went back, had to use her bangle to help her grandma catch up to the rest of the family. You know what I mean? Like they even used the bootstrap there after telling us that's not how time works. It's like, yeah, for some reason, y'all kind of going back on y'all words, because I think they're thinking about time different. And so that's how they want us to think about time now. So whatever, if they say so, I'm going with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's one of the you're bound to get caught up in
you're bound.
the inexplicable and unrealistic nature of all of it. I think everything kind of folds upon itself and it becomes like, well, that's not really going to work, especially with how they laid out the rules previously, especially in a movie like Endgame, which goes in a
Mhm.
completely different direction. And so I think the only out that they could have had is that, oh yeah, it's the TVA, time works different here, and so anything can happen.
Exactly.
But
Mhm.
it's one of those things where it's like, I think we are at the place now where it's like, just don't care. It's Chris
Yep.
Nolan and Tenet, where it's just like, just feel
Wh
it, just go
Here for
with
the
it,
ride.
just here for the ride, just go with it. And I think by and large that has worked. Sometimes I kind of raise my eyebrow like, well, wait, but you're not explaining that. It doesn't really make sense. But I think by this particular moment of the episode, I was so locked in just to the emotion of the moment and the tense nature that
Yeah.
as it was unfolding on screen, it actually kind of got me. And I was just like, wow, okay, this is okay. We're going
Mhm.
here with this. And so there's obviously a reason that he's doing that. And they also follow it up with a really, really long, drawn out scene focusing on the telephone ringing, only to just like play a trick on us. And it's just like, oh, be like, oh, thank God you finally answered. Like,
I was like,
they
"What in the Matrix?"
yeah, they built it up for all that to just, pay it off. There were a lot of movie references. I mean,
A
even
lot
even
of movie references.
even
Yeah.
him pruning himself, that made me think about Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. The
Mhm.
whole finding yourself, with the deer, the I forget what it was actually called in the
Yeah,
book, but
the thingy. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, but him seeing himself, and so there was a lot of that, but it was cool. I think again, it ratcheted up that tension in that moment. But it all leads to those final key scenes of this episode in which Victor Timely decides to volunteer to take himself out on the ledge to go try to fix the temporal loom, to try to stop everything from decaying and destroying the TVA. Immediately unsuccessful. I mean, he doesn't make it 5 feet, and he just gets spaghettied out of time immediately. And we see the horrific reactions on the faces of everybody: Casey, OB, Mobius, Loki, Sylvie. They have realized that it's over. Time has run out. We have no solution, and there's a massive, massive explosion. And it raises a lot of questions because they just cut to black. There's no post credit scene. Now we know that there's two
Mhm.
episodes left in the show, and
For sure.
people are not going to die, not in that way in particular. So there has to be some sort of resolution. They have, kind of written themselves in a corner on purpose, I think, in order to find out a creative way to get out of it. But just in the moment before we, talk about what it could mean for the next two episodes and what it ultimately might resolve into, I mean, how did you feel about just seeing all of that unfold just so quickly, to see just the horrific scene of Victor Timely, getting spaghettied out of time, and then
Yeah.
that followed up by that big explosion, realizing like, oh shit, it's just over. Like they just completely failed the mission. It's a wrap here. What was your reaction to just seeing all that happen on screen?
Yeah. First, real quick, when I seen him turn to spaghetti, I was so surprised. Like, I was like, that, like, it's bro. I was like, did this dude just die? Like, this is the moment in which what?
He was also
Spaghetti?
like so rah rah before. He was like, I'll
Bruh.
do it. I'm the only
Yeah.
one that can handle it because I can fix it if something breaks. Like
Yeah.
you're just behind him, like, yeah, go do it,
Mhm.
Victor. And then it's like,
Exactly.
oh fuck.
Yeah, he was like, "It's time to win," or something. I forgot the exact words he said. I was like, "Oh my god!" And then that's it. He turns into. It was very reminiscent of what what's her name, of what Wanda did to Mister Fantastic, and she kind
Oh
of like
yeah.
turned him into spaghetti. It looked very similar. I'm like, huh, maybe that's like the same idea with reality there or something weird. But man, I was just so surprised of what happened there. And then it was like surprise after surprise. Like the first surprise was like, dang, they really just killed off Victor Timely like that? Because again, what we're saying in the back of my head, this dude could still end up being the big bad. You know what I'm saying? He could still end up being the Kang that we go against in these secret wars, man. But and then it just keeps blowing up. I was like, oh my God, wait, what's happening? Like it's a really crazy moment, I think, as first time viewing, because I don't know, you just don't expect all these L's at once. You know what I'm saying? It's just it was very crazy. But to see the faces of everybody, this show, something's wrong with me, bro. I really like losses in these things. Like I don't, that you have to take L's in order to come back. You know what I'm saying? And it really is. It's refreshing a lot of times when you can see a group of people, a group of characters that you've become so accustomed to lose, because it really is heartbreaking. And in that moment where you see all these timelines merging, blowing up, whatever we're seeing them do, and everyone is in shock again. Everyone, it feels like the moment where docs purges the timelines, and everyone's like, oh shit, this is like almost worse because it's not a screen anymore. It's like we're seeing it in real time. We're watching these timelines explode in our faces, and it's such a bright light, man. And so it was very harrowing. That's a good way I think I can put it. It's a very scary thing to see, because yeah, it just makes you feel hopeless. And again, part of me, it sucks, and I was like, damn, I'm sad, but also part of me was like, damn, good job, Marvel. Like, more L's, please. Let's take more L's because it makes for an interesting story. And again, when you can leave a cliffhanger like that, it only makes you want to watch the next episode. Now I'm like, what the hell is about to happen? And to me, that's good TV if you can do that.
Yeah, which, they have largely failed at that good TV element of wanting you to come back to the next week's episode, like giving us a reason to ask all these questions and to think about next week and how it's going to get resolved and what's going to come next. But this was like the perfect way. Could have been a season finale. Like they could have
It
just
could
ended it
have.
here
I
and
thought
just
that same
left
thing.
left all the
Mm-hmm.
questions on the table and make us wait until whatever the next project was going to be where they choose to resolve it. But thankfully we do have 2 episodes left. But it's a big swing to do something like this. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's on the level, not quite to the same degree, but it's getting close to the level of what we saw Thanos do in Infinity War, where it's like,
Yeah.
yo, is this really happening? Like, are they really
Mm-hmm.
they're really just gonna lose and it's just gonna be over, And I think that that's like always a good feeling because you don't expect that. You don't expect the heroes of this comic book storytelling to ever suffer any legitimate major losses to this scale and to this degree. Somebody might perish along the way, and even with what happened with episode 2, that was already a pretty significant loss. And now it's like an even more significant loss where it's like, we have no control over this. This shit is just like completely on a different type of level, and we have no resolution. We have no way around it. It's just done and over. And there's no end in sight to the destruction that's being caused here with this
Mm-hmm.
temporal loom exploding. And it's a really crazy visual. And to just see them stand there helpless and hopeless and it's all really, really effective stuff, and I just love, like, the choice to end it here to make us wait and to get us to think about what these final 2 episodes are gonna hold, which kinda brings us to that. I mean, there's so many directions we can go with this. I mean, first and foremost, to go back to the pruning of Loki, I mean, do you think ultimately that that's how we get things back on track, that Loki essentially pruned himself out of time minutes before in the TVA to preserve a version of himself that knows what's happening, because that other version of Loki kind of has an idea of like what's going on in the TVA, or at least he can be in a position to get the information because they do go somewhere. They typically go to the void at the end of time, which is where Eliath was in last season, which is where the other Loki
Mm-hmm.
variants were. Maybe we see them again. Maybe that's where they all go after they get pruned once again. But do you think
Yeah.
that was ultimately the motivation for why Loki did what he did to himself, is to preserve that version so that he can go around and recruit everybody else, recruit OB, recruit Mobius, recruit Hunter B-15. He can go find them to get them back together to fix this and to do it once again. Because you kind of have seen this, I think, in other time travel stories where it's like, yeah, they fail, but now that they've seen it all fail and go to shit, they kind of know exactly what they have to do in order to fix it. And so they just have to get all the pieces back together, like the time
Mm-hmm.
heist in Avengers
And then do it
Endgame,
different.
and
Yeah.
then just do it differently in order to
Uh-huh.
succeed. Do you foresee that being sort of the next 2 episodes of the story that they take it?
Man, I don't know. I think that's a possibility only because the other part of my theory ish is that everyone kind of got pushed back into their own timelines, right? Like finally going to see Mobius's timeline. We're finally going to see, I don't know, whoever Casey where he lives at. I can imagine a world where the next 2 episodes is like that. Is Loki being like, I gotta go get Mobius, and him running into Mobius in his own timeline and finding Mobius. Still very cognizant of the TVA though, and finding Mobius be like, damn, I did have a happy life or something dark like that. You know what I mean? Like, oh, him sitting and watching his house of what could have been, the timeline of what could have been his life. I can see a world like that. So maybe I think that's a really cool theory. If that's to happen, I can see another theory where, like you said, they are all at the end of time. I don't know what that looks like or what that does, but that could be another fun adventure. But man, who knows? They could really do any and everything they want to. But in my mind, all that happened was all of the timelines exploded into one timeline? Question mark. Like everybody I don't know how that works either. Like it's one big incursion happened of all the timelines, and not everyone exists in the same plane. And so an even bigger question for me at the end of all of this is, has the TVA been destroyed? You know what I mean? Like, is that the end of the TVA as we know it? And I think that's the answer I'm looking forward to the most. But I really like that adventure idea that you have. I had to prove myself. Let's do it again. Because again, my first thought was he remembered the moment and remember he got pruned. And if he doesn't prune him right now, can he possibly be in this moment if he doesn't prune himself at this moment? So, hey, who knows, man? I'm really not sure, but I love the idea of the possibilities of going into these next two episodes of what it could be. I have no idea.
Yeah, I think him pruning himself, contingency plan, preserve a version of himself that is somewhat
Mm-hmm.
cognizant of what's happening, because that
Mm-hmm.
Loki is aware of just everything that's happened with He Who Remains and Sylvie. He's seeing the TVA kind of fall apart in his very, in the very midst of him. So that version has an idea of like the danger ahead. And so I think that version of Loki, which is, I don't know if it's a past or present, but regardless, that version of Loki is going to have to find all of the other people,
Mm-hmm.
Mobius, Casey, OB. They are going to exist in their own lives outside of the TVA. I think what we speculated about earlier this season is, will we be able to really see people outside of the TVA in their past lives? Will we be able to
Mm-hmm.
see their existence there? They've obviously been teasing Mobius a ton, the jet ski shit, like all of that. They've been teasing a ton. I think we're finally going to get there. I think we're going to see the life
Yeah.
that he has and see like whether or not it's fruitful or satisfying or disappointing. We'll see
Mm-hmm.
Obi's life. We might see Casey's life. I think we're going to see all of that stuff. We're going to get really all of the puzzle pieces put together there to see like where are
Mm-hmm.
these people coming from, and Loki is going to have to explain to them because they're not going to know what the
Mm-hmm.
fuck is happening. He's going to have to tell them, hey, you actually are a very, very integral piece into the TVA. I need you to come with me because we have to save time and life as we know it and all of existence, and you're the only person that can help me. And so it's going to take some time to get all those pieces together, but I think that's what's going to happen, and they will find their way back to the TVA prior to the destruction of the loom in order to preserve it. So in essence, they're going to have to alter time or create a new timeline or something of that nature. They're going to have to
Mm-hmm.
create something of a new timeline because I think, it might be a reach here, and it's going against exactly what we just talked about like 5 minutes ago. But if they were to operate under the rules of what was established in Endgame, this happened and it can't be undone. All they can do is
Right.
create a new timeline.
Mm-hmm.
So if we
Exactly.
were to do that, then that would make sense. But if we're undoing it, then that obviously creates some problems, but we're just gonna have to go with it. But I think
Mm-hmm.
regardless, he's gonna have to recruit everybody. It's gonna be his own team that he gets back together. He has to convince them to come back to the TVA. You kind of spoke to what I was gonna ask about the other question, but thinking ahead to other projects, knowing that this does play a very, very crucial role in the bigger picture for the multiverse saga, the Kang Dynasty Secret Wars, could the events of what just happened here with this explosion of the loom, could this be basically what causes incursions? I mean, we've been asking that question a lot. Like, what's going to be the event that causes
Mm-hmm.
multiple universes to collide into each other? And we suspect and sort of know that the TVA will have a role in Deadpool 3. That is one of the upcoming movies that's, supposed to drop within the next year or so. Could this potentially be a direct tie into that? Could we see incursions come to life in Deadpool 3 and that kind of be the driving narrative of that movie? The other Fox universes come into play, all these other characters, and Deadpool is now at the center of it all. And maybe it was all
Mm-hmm.
caused by this destruction of the temporal loom, and maybe this just sets in motion a chain of events that carries all the way into Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars. Do you think it potentially has the ramifications to go that far? Or will it just be wrapped up neatly next week or in the next couple of episodes before we even get to those next few movies?
Man, I need it not to be wrapped up neatly, man. I need Loki season 2 to matter. It needs to matter to the grand scheme of what the MCU is trying to do, man, because there's still a lot of legwork, lot of legwork to get to any sense of King Dynasty / Secret Wars. And I think this could very well be the beginning. A lot of the projects that we know are happening in between don't necessarily feel like they contain the DNA to explain all of this, to say these are the reasons why the incursions are happening. It's right here, it's right now in the TVA as we're looking at timelines in real time. It is literally right here, right now. And I think they have an opportunity to say, nope, this is it. This is the moment. This is the multiversal saga. You know what I'm saying? This is that time. And so I'm hoping. Really am hoping, man. I'm really am hoping that this is it, and they don't put a bow on it in that way, right? I'm hoping this propels us into everything else. Shoot, hopefully, probably not. I don't know what this looks like, but hopefully, it even propels us into the Marvels. You know what I'm saying? Hopefully, this propels us into all of these future projects to say, man, look, this is what happened in Loki, and now everything is going to shit because of this explosion that we just watched. I need this to be important. The way the episode ended off, the way everyone looks sad, the way it feels like we lost, the way all of that. I need all of this to matter. And I think it has the potential to do so, man. I really do. Because where else is it going to go? You know what I mean? I feel like it's not going to be in Captain America. It's not going to be in the Thunderbolts. It show is only going to be an Echo. You know what I'm saying? So I need this to matter for the saga, and I think they'll go that direction, man. I really do. Because why else make it feel this big? You know, they really did make this feel big, and so I'm hoping they can stand their ground and make this yeah, and follow through, man. Because again, what we do know about Deadpool in Deadpool 3 feels like a story that makes at least somewhat sense. You know what I mean? If they can carry it over from a TV show like Loki, we know the TVA is involved in that. Why would the TVA be like, you know what I'm saying? Why would the TVA be involved in Deadpool if not something big happened within the TVA? And so yeah, I think it matters. We just need to see the events play out at this point.
Marvel just released an official MCU timeline book, and in the forward of the book, Kevin Feige notably made a very, I think, important comment in saying that all storytelling in Marvel on the feature film side is canonical.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the sacred timeline, Earth 616, that's been the MCU proper, the Infinity Saga, what we're seeing now in phase 4, phase 5. Of course, like that is its own timeline. But as we have seen in other movies like Spider-Man No Way Home or Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, they are not afraid to pull in characters from other quote unquote universes, whether it's Tobey
Mm-hmm.
Maguire or Andrew Garfield or Black Bolt, coming into Multiverse of
Mm.
Madness. Like
Yeah.
those tools are at their disposal. So him saying that and that book coming out like at this time, like nothing is a coincidence when when you're dealing with something of this
Mm-hmm.
scale. And I think seeing this event play out in the way that it did is doing a couple of things, and I think that that's like the most effective thing possible. It's the best possible solution when you can achieve a few different things at once. One, it certainly resets the table for the next two episodes and gives you a reason to come back. Secondly, I think that this speaks exactly to what Sylvie wants. This burns down the TVA as they know it. And if indeed the remaining story is Loki having to essentially get all of the pieces back together himself and kind of rebuild the TVA or reformulate it in his
Mm-hmm.
own way, he's achieving what she's always talked about. Like we need to burn this shit down. Plus, we just got rid of General Dox and all her loyalists. Now we just got to
Yeah.
take out Ravonna and Miss Minutes. They're like the last remnants of the old TVA. He who remains is
Mm-hmm.
dead. Perhaps this is that fresh start, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that that could explicitly be talked about where it's like, yeah, that TVA is destroyed. It is gone, but we can build a new TVA, one that is actually fighting the right fight in the right way. And that's going to be
Yeah.
here and be present for the rest of the multiverse saga leading into Deadpool 3, Kang Dynasty Secret Wars. And then thirdly, I think, one of the things that's really important here is the fact that, you know, with the remaining story that they have here, I think though it will be undone to a certain degree,
Mm-hmm.
I do think that the ramifications of this will still be felt in the face of incursions. I do foresee, or at least I hope that when we talk about incursions or the reason that they started and why they occurred, I hope
Mm-hmm.
that this comes back to be sort of that focal point because Loki has been the one series, the one property that has done the most to make progress in that way. First killing He Who
Mm.
Remains, unleashing all of the variants of Kang and
Mm-hmm.
and potentially setting forth a multiversal war. I think we still have to come back around to that. And then you also tied into the fact that this temporal loom has exploded. So now,
Yeah.
two times in a row, shit's been thrown off and the status quo is all fucked up. That can't be left unchecked. Like, we have to talk about that. And that has to
Mm-hmm.
be something that we feel for the next 5 to 6 years. And I think that that's where they're going. Or at least I hope so. I hope that they're really setting forth the blueprint in Loki for what the remaining years of the saga is going to look like because so far they've kind of teetered with it. mostly by the Kane connection, but I want to see more of that TVA Loki stuff come into the
Yep.
forefront. I think it's about time for him to step up and kind of be one of those prominent characters once we do get to those Avengers movies, whenever they do come out. So it's going to be
Mhm.
really, really interesting to see. We got 2 episodes left. And folks, with all of that out the way, those are all of our thoughts on season 2, episode 4 of Loki. If you've checked out this episode on Disney Plus, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.